Cosmos, but we didn't get around to it yet. But we were going to do don't get offended, Ken, but I mean, I'm talking. But he mentioned saying something about. We're both old, Ken, but these were really old guys. They're older than you or me. So, what do you want to do, Ken and Janet? We need a who's who directory. And then now, Jen, I don't know if you know this, but Ken is in the Who's Who in Texas, and I was too. So, Ken, I was in Who's Who, and so were you in Texas in some book. And my Uncle Strom Thurmond was in one of those.
I want to go back.
Now you want to get the Roswell story?
We were on timelines and time travel. Next thing we were George Filer, which we don't. And then we were in his house at midnight, but it wasn't his house. It was somebody else's. So I'm lost.
Okay, you want the story? All right, the midnight story. Okay, Janet.
I asked the question. Wait, I asked the question like, do you have any time travel timeline things? Because I did, and I gave an example. So it's your turn and Ken's turn. Okay, so stick to the subject. We're talking about. Do you have anything when you're aware that you were somehow shifting into a different timeline, or you time travel? Do you have anything like that?
Well, yeah.
If you don't make it up. If you do,
well, 63 was Kennedy. I know where I was when Kennedy was shot because I was supposed to be in Dallas at Six Flags. And because the president was coming in and doing all the traffic, my parents decided not to go. So I was in school in Miss David's 7th grade when Kennedy was shot. Okay, so that timeline starts for me. That was a huge reality check because it came over the speaker about him being shot, and everybody in our room clapped like idiots because we didn't know what was going on. And this one boy, Johnny Nichols, his family had the water company, Johnny and Tommy Nichols, another Tommy. But, we had to sit there for 30 minutes with the Miss Davis because we didn't even know. I didn't even know what they said. Everybody was clapping. I was looking around like an idiot. I just didn't know what was going on. But then after the big speech she gave us, it sunk in that it changed my reality. Some part of me grew up that day at that time.
Right.
I guess for a lot of people in today's reality, it may be 2001, 9/11. They remember where they were, and my stepdad had just died then, and my timeline changed. So, in my reality, it seems that my own personal trauma will cause your timelines to shift in your own reality, but also we have shared, like the Mandela effect. It changes your timeline. It's like somebody changes it, and I think that's what you mean in regards to this. But with that, going at midnight, that's a spook time for when everybody's the best time to sleep, noon to 3 or noon to 4. That's when your spook business happens a lot because we have less traffic on the roads, less traffic. Most people generically are sleeping. But, yeah, that's important because Stan, I don't know, we're going to have to go back. But, Janet, I'd ask you to, we'll research it. I don't know where, Stan and I used to talk, folks, on the phones for hours at a time. And I'd have it was expensive, 75 to 150 talking to Canada. So AT&T knows because they were making the money. But back in the day when I got picked up in a van and taken by the Navy. I believe it was a blue van they used to have white vans and blue vans and black vans. But I was taken, and to this day, Janet, I would like to have answers, but I don't, folks, to a lot of things. I just go with the flow. But Ken, you may need to know this because you were working at NASA, but back after I was working there, across the street and meeting all these people, I was like a blonde Nordic type, Janet, but I wasn't a blonde. I was a brunette, but I wore wigs. So I don't get this, but it's like this intelligence agency will have you do certain things to look certain ways. And I know the Men in Black, if that's what we expect during this time, the Men in Black would come in and show you're standing there in black suits with the glass. Typical. And some of them may work for Department of Energy, some for intelligence agencies. But this night, one or two men were there in a car, like the Men in Black on X-Filers, or X-Files, right? The smoking man that Rick invoked. Rick knows him personally, Dr. Rick Miller. But Janet, we need to put the timelines together and wormholes and time travel and space and show how we can do this. And I would suggest we do it parallel, linear, length, and width, an engineering term, and get Ken to help us set it up structurally. Because when we swap timelines, what happens is a piece of us will go where we were in that reality. And you can have 2 observers or even 10 million observers, and it depends who is doing the investigation, but we're all observers if we've got our eyes open, our ears open. So we're all here on different timelines at all times. It's very hard to be in the now. But right now we're using radio waves, and so we'll be here and we can go back and listen, go back in time and listen to us, which I usually will try to do, and hear what we created today with Ken R. Johnston, which is going to be Fleet Commander, and he's 524. But Janet, that house in my mind.
Back. Yeah, as soon as you're done
I'll go over the house.
Back to Ken.
Ken, why don't you talk, and then we can go back to that story. It's the Marcel story, but I don't even know if Ken knows that. But Ken, you want to talk about where you were or timeline that swapped for you? I can tell you about the house after that.
Well, the best part would be in figuring out if for other people. Let me get other people that maybe have dreams and they sometimes are thinking back. Well, I think I was at such and such a place at a certain time, but I don't know if I was there. And there are times whenever I'll go to a building, never been there before, but then I know right where the doors are and exactly where I was going, etc. And that kind of makes you stop and wait a minute now. How could I know that if I've never been there before? And one of the biggest problems that we run into when we have been pulled out of our timeline and being used in another area, or for instance, like when I was on Mars, and I would come back, we'd get what we'd call a memory wipe. And they would literally go in and obliterate that period of time in your memory. And then you have to try to, in my case, the only way I would try to figure out exactly where was I and what took place when that was going on. And while you were just talking a lot about your experiences there at the Johnston Space Center and the people you were with, that was sort of triggering some of my memories. And in my particular case, I told a little bit earlier when we first started about when I was a little kid. As I grew up, there are gaps at points and times in this timeline of my life where I don't remember how I got there and what took place. See, that's another problem. When they start messing with your memory and stuff, then they can start saying, "Oh, we got to put this person in a nut house or something." But in reality, no, it's because we were being used in a adjacent or a parallel timeline, and that's what you have to work your way through. And that's the only way I know to do that is through meditation. This is what a lot of the from India, that's why they do a lot of meditation, and they are able to get into their own timelines and their own memories. In our case, it's where we have to work with someone like Dr. Sasha Lesson and get hypnotic regression and go back. And the information is in our heads and in our minds and our memories. It's just that we don't have the links to be able to pull it out. Now, you were just telling me some of the events and places where you were, and wow, I'm going over in my head times where I was be gone for a week or two. This is something else where I run into someone else who has an experience that has been on Mars or on the moon or what have you, and they're talking about the things that happened to them. It triggers a thought of, well, son of a gun, I was there at the same time. Well, you were just talking about some of the people that you had direct contact with, and you talked about some of the men in black, and then Janet was talking about her experiences there. But then you've got your what do you call these psychologists? They say, oh well, you're only recreating a memory which isn't yours. You're borrowing it from someone else. Well, some of that may be true, and then there could well be how we have been manipulated and used in different timelines and time zones. far as I'm concerned, I think I've got in the right timeline because that's where I found my wife from Canada and me from Texas. So we meet in Washington. But yet we're now discovering that that's something that she doesn't want to get into very far. She actually is a very gifted, talented person, even in tarot readings and stuff. And she pretty much wants to leave that to me to worry about, just so long as it doesn't affect our relationship. So it's pro and con. There's so much going on that it's kind of hard to wrap around and understand it all. That's why we have specialists like Janet and Sasha and you. And, myself, I've been the guy that's usually been in the cockpit, and then the technical person and testing the systems and flying. But now I'm going to try to keep the group together and stay focused. And I think if we can get our Allied Command group all to kind of work together, then we will have a lot more, and I'll use the word power, because look at it this way, if we're going to have full disclosure, and if it comes at September 22nd real soon, we need to be, that will happen because if you have enough people focused on the events that we expect or that we know are going to take place, the quicker it will come into reality. If my understanding, I'm sure Janet can jump in on this one, is that if we have enough people creating enough energy in that timeline, it can become the primary event that we're involved in. Is that about right, Janet?
Yeah, when two or more are gathered in my name. So when we put the group energy, we focus on, a certain outcome perspective, we can co-create it together. And that's why often after a lot of these group efforts, they want to, separate us. If you're working on, I remember Clifford Stone, he was working on the retrieval and where the retrieval efforts were down craft, and so he had this book that he would go repair extraterrestrials. He was an extraterrestrial medic, right? He knew how to treat like 60 different species. But after he started his 2, 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it was, in the military doing that, they dispersed everybody around the world so they wouldn't be able to connect the dots and remember, so they lost their power. If they would have remained in the group, we would be on a different timeline because they would have come forward and said, hey, we all worked on this. So that's part of the intention of, I'll call it the Illuminati, or whatever, So we need to overcome that by unifying our thoughts and getting our timeline, get our story straight. And it really is beneficial to, get a competent hypnotherapist. It can't all be Dr. Lessing because he's only one person, but there's a lot of competent hypnotherapists out there. And you get your recording equipment and you allow yourself to be regressed and you get your timeline, your story, and go back to the beginning. And every time you have what I call a screen memory, like you might remember something that'll trigger you. And, it's often that feeling of deja vu. And it's like, I know there's more to that story. I'm just getting this tip of the tongue memory, but there's actually more. So if you allow yourself to get regressed, that's what I do all the time. I'll say to I married my hypnotherapist. I say, honey, I want to go into that more. I know there's more to that story. And so we do, sometimes we only have time for a mini session, a half an hour or something. But we go in and retrieve those pieces of memory, those lost pieces of my soul, which helps me get the comprehensive picture. And so that's part of the vision on these conferences and workshops and symposiums and everything that we plan on doing is to help everybody get this picture. Because I think the experiencers are actually disclosure, but for some reason the people that are at the top and they run all these large conferences or these large movements want that to be the disclosure movement. But I think it's more complicated than that. The disclosure is going to take all of us, waking up and,
Right.
Ahead,
right now, I think would be an excellent time right now to our listeners that are listening in is that you can hear us talking about events and how we've had to rediscover things that have taken place that we've been part of, either during this timeline, which we can't remember what took place, or even in another timeline. Now's the time that you need to come forward, and it's getting, let's say it's safe to come forward and not be treated like you're an absolute, there's a lot of good words, idiots, crazy, insane.